Thank you for joining us today for this Council of State Governments CSG-hosted webinar entitled Pension Reforms, Lessons from the South. I am Sujit Kanagaratner, Senior Fiscal Analyst for the Southern Legislative Conference, which is the Southern Office of the Council of State Governments. Our sincere thanks to our distinguished panel for setting aside time in their busy schedules to talk to us today about the reforms they are leading in their states. I also want to thank Heather Perkins in CSG's Lexington office for taking care of all the logistics related to this webinar. I'd like to take care of a few housekeeping items first. You are all in listen-only mode. If you wish to ask a question, please use the question box on your GoToWebinar toolbar. You may type in a question at any time during the webinar. We will be recording this webinar and posting it later on the CSG Knowledge Center website at knowledgecenter.csg.org. It will also be available at the SLC website at slcatlanta.org. Today's discussion will focus on public pensions, one of the most challenging fiscal issues confronting every state and local government in the country. Even before the onset of the Great Recession, most state and local government pension plans were struggling to meet their pension and retiree health care obligations. The gaps between assets and liabilities in these public pension plans had widened as a result of plan sponsors failing to make adequate plan contributions, granting unfunded benefit increases, and suffering serious investment losses during the Great Recession. In response, in the last 3 years, 45 states have made significant changes to their retirement plans in an effort to bolster their funding levels. A number of southern states have been at the forefront in this reform effort and have enacted changes to stabilize the fiscal position of their pension plans. Here to address some of these reforms are legislators from Oklahoma, West Virginia, and Louisiana, who've been at the forefront of the reform effort in their states. Our first speaker is Oklahoma Representative Randy McDaniel, Chair of the House Pension Oversight Committee in his state, and Chair of the SLC's Fiscal Affairs and Government Operations Committee. Our second speaker is West Virginia Senator Dan Foster, Chair of the Senate Pensions and Retirement Committee in his state. Finally, our third speaker is Louisiana Senator Elbert Guillory, Chair of the Senate Retirement Committee in his state. Each of our presenters will speak for 15 minutes. Please feel free to submit your questions as they come up throughout the program, and we will try to answer them as we get to the end of the program. Now, our first speaker, Oklahoma Representative Randy McDaniel.
Thank you, Sujit, so much for that kind introduction. I look forward to discussing the pension reforms passed in Oklahoma the last several years. As we look at the next slide, and as we all know, we have a moral and legal responsibility to keep the retirement promises that have been made. Reforms are necessary to achieve this goal, and it takes teamwork to pass pension legislation. In the next slide, we'll review the impact of the reforms on our financial condition. Before the 2011 legislative session, the unfunded liability associated with the state pension systems totaled over $16 billion. After the reforms were enacted, the unfunded liability fell to $10.6 billion. So together with the House, Senate, and the governor, we were able to reduce our unfunded liability by $5.5 billion. I know this is a lot of detail for different groups, but we have 7 major plans in the state of Oklahoma, the largest of which is teachers' retirement at the top. We can see the drop in their unfunded liability as well as the other groups. It may be worth noting that wildlife at the bottom actually increased their unfunded liability. They had major reform efforts that were separate 2 or 3 years prior. But pretty much across the board we had a major decrease in unfunded liability. The most helpful thing to me in these type of group settings is to find out what's actually been achieved in different states. Sometimes we have wishful thinking that does us little good, and so I thought I'd actually show the bills that actually got through the legislature and signed by the governor. House Bill 1007 was our first major act. This was in response to the education community trying to pass on a very large funding increase with no revenue source to pay for it. And it became clear that we had over $200 million that when we greatly increased the funding for the retirement systems that were going directly into the retirement system that weren't accounted for, and we weren't getting the benefit of the recognition for per pupil spending. And so this made a little maneuver where it would go through the teacher's system and allow that over, it's actually closer to $300 million now, where it goes directly into the teacher's retirement, and we also get that credit nationally for our per pupil spending. One issue we tried to address that came into a great compromise was Senate Bill 891. We have a real problem with part-time teachers. You know, they take their retirement and then they come back in, and it's a very expensive proposition. It's good for the school districts, good for the teachers, but bad for our retirement system. The final compromise ended up being just making all the school districts pay at the same rate. It was only $5 million, but obviously that did help some funding for the retirement system. We looked at best practices, and we have a similar bill that we passed in 12, and I'll get to that in a minute, but Senate Bill 347 requires that if they are convicted of a felony in the line of duty, they give up their taxpayer subsidized pension system. They get their money back, but no taxpayer subsidized pension. Senate Bill 1002 and House Bill 1002 and Senate Bill 840. We had some problems with receiving the money in a timely manner. We thought we could save several $1 million for each of those two major systems, teachers and for public employees, if we had a penalty for late payments, and we think that will increase efficiencies. Now we're getting into some of the reforms that really made a large difference. Senate Bill 377 and 794 increased the retirement age. We have a bifurcated system still. This was a compromise. We looked at having a hard cap at 65 for full retirement benefits, but we ended up honoring career service, both in teachers, both in public employees, and in a minute we'll look at the judges. We also affected elected officials in this regard. So basically, we increased everyone's retirement age by an average of 2 or 3 years, and there'll be two systems, one for career employees and the other for more short-term employees. Like I was saying, House Bill 1010 did that for the judiciary as well. Didn't have much of a pushback in that because most of them stay quite a long time, and so we found a nice solution that we could all live with. And so in effect we increased all non-uniform retirement ages, and the combined savings over the next 30 years for those actions will be roughly $2 billion. Our major reform for 2011 obviously was pretty controversial, but we did something unique in Oklahoma. We said we're going to pay for the benefits up front, and most systems have had the habit when they give a COLA just to have those absorbed by the pension systems themselves. This in Oklahoma cost about $350 million for a 2% COLA, and so by requiring an upfront, decision to have it funded, that saved us over the next 30 years over $5 billion. Sujit, I would say my screen has gone blank. Does everyone else still have their screens?
Yes.
Okay, I'm just going to go with my hard copy and hope that they'll follow along. Then I'm going to.
Okay.
So my screen is no longer there. So let me go ahead and move right into the 2012 legislation. It was a tougher fight in 2012 because we had quite a bit of success in 2011. Some people had felt like that was last year's story, but when we still looked at the numbers, we saw some deficiencies in the annual cash flow analysis, and we still had a $10.6 billion unfunded liability. And so while we had greatly improved it, we were ready to continue marching forward, but it was a little bit more difficult. Senate Bill 1001 ended up being our most significant piece of legislation. The troopers actually had a benefit that no one else had, where it allowed recalculation of final pay, and it also allowed for an automatic COLA whenever we give active duty folks a pay increase. And so we didn't get the employee contribution aspect increase like we had planned on, but we did get those two elements removed, and that greatly improved the financial condition of the state troopers. House Bill 2319 allowed for, in effect, it allowed for the sale of the police pension and system retirement board, the real estate that they actually occupy. They had a very attractive offer, and 2 or 3 times of what they paid for it, and so that would, all that excess was going to go into their retirement system. One issue that was pretty prominent, we did one through administrative rules and one through the teacher's retirement, was the sick leave. It's kind of akin to increasing the retirement age, but in effect, they were able to round up to another year of service, and basing their retirement on that, it was actually quite a costly benefit that they were getting by rounding up their accredited service numbers. So we basically have stopped that for future employees, and in effect, however many years you worked is actually how many years that are going to be counted. When we look at the step-up provision, 2322 was just putting the elected officials on the same page as all other public employees. We actually overdid it the year before by reducing the benefits to actually less than everybody else. So we made sure that everyone's treated the same. In this environment of benign interest rates and uncertainty in the equity markets as always, House Bill 2320 allowed for the teachers' retirement, a very sizable group, to invest up to 10% of their assets in real property. They didn't take advantage of it. I was proud of it. We all paid very close attention to see the due diligence they would do, and so that's actually not happened, but it's something to show that we're trying to get creative, and if it's within reason, to try to get the yields up on our investment returns. House Bill 2623 combines kind of what we did for police and firefighters the year before, and it basically says if you're a teacher and you're in the line of duty that commits a felony, you're not going to get a taxpayer-subsidized retirement benefit. 2010, like I was saying earlier, and I'll just put this in a percentage basis, we were at 56% funded, and we were one of the worst funded pension systems in America. And you can see up there at the top with teachers' retirement down to 47.9. That was in pretty bad shape, and that didn't even account for the fact that we had a 5-year smoothing, and so they didn't capture some of their bad numbers from the earlier years. And I'll get into that in just a second of how that affects what's actually happened very most recently when we've been getting the new numbers in. So by 2011, we had the state pension systems as a whole as a weighted average. When you put them all together and weight the average, is a 67% funded. And so we went from the bottom 5 to roughly 33rd in the country in funding status, and that's a very significant move in 1 year. As we look at the next page, there's a lot of detail that I actually use a lot, but there's an old joke that one of my goals is to have the sheet confusing enough where I'm the only one that can understand it. but anyway, this really gets to the nuts and bolts of what we're looking at. If trying to look at the normal costs and what the amortization costs to pay down all our past debts, and we're really proud of the fact that we've been able to bring down primarily the amortization costs, but also the normal costs slightly with some of these changes. And now we're actually cash flowing for the first time in anyone's memory our teachers' retirement and our public employees. It also does highlight that we still have some problems with the public safety plans, and we still have some work to be done, but we went from almost a hopeless situation to getting online, having a chance for success. So let's look at the consequences of inaction. Like I say, we're just bringing in our new actuarial numbers, and it's unfortunate because now we're capturing in the 2008-2009 numbers from our 5-year smoothing. And so we will see an overall drop in our funding status, probably about 2%, which in our case is a little over $1 billion. But it was expected. Obviously, those were tough times, and that was a great recession. So when we looked at reality, if we'd have gone on a market basis for teachers' retirement, we would have been down about 42% coming into the 2011, but it was bad enough at 47, 48% to get people to finally take this serious. And so I'm still pushing forward. The consequences of not moving forward and getting these solved is we're going to have budget pressures. You know, we're investing a great deal of resources into solving this problem, and obviously that takes money away from everything else we want to do. The borrowing cost, you know, the rating agencies are looking at it in more detail, and we're going to have to get serious about that. We have a great rating at AA+ for the first time in our state history. We actually, if you include the stable outlook versus the United States AA+ negative outlook, we've actually, you know, slightly better. But still, we'd like to be a AAA, and we're all trying to do that. And we want to pay lower interest rates if we do borrow any money. And so we're going to have the course ahead. You know, we feel like it is still necessary. You know, people are living longer. We try to get that accounted for in our actuarial analysis, but you know, the ratio of number of workers to retirees is decreasing. I get a call every week about the assumed discount rate. We're a little less than the national average, but nonetheless, you know, most of ours are 7.5. We have one at 7, but our largest is at 8, and they have performed very well and exceeded that very slightly over the last 30 years, but nonetheless, we don't know what the future has to hold. And then you look at a $10.6 billion unfunded liability. It's still a very major financial challenge. And so we've conducted interim studies, and I have a full agenda of bills I'm going to try to achieve this coming year. Well, I appreciate the opportunity to share our story. I always learn from everybody else, but I look forward to any questions that anyone might have. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Representative McDaniel. Senator Foster, would you like to go ahead?
Thank you very much, Sujit. Representative McDaniel is a tough act to follow, and I will do my best representing the great state of West Virginia. I have been Senate pension chair for 8 years. My tenure is about to end in about 3 weeks as I retire from public service. But it's been an interesting 8 years, and I will certainly try to elaborate on a number of initiatives during my presentation. I will note that these will not necessarily be in chronological order, but we have touched on during that time all of our 9 plans that are in existence. Next slide, please. We have, as Representative McDaniel mentioned, our goal with our 9 state plans is to, of course, reach financial sustainability for the state, but also to keep our promises and provide for a decent retirement for our loyal employees. And it's sometimes very difficult to do that. But we now have a total unfunded liability of a bit over $5 billion for all of these state plans, and all of it is amortized to be eliminated by the year 2035. And you know, it's become a long way. Back in the early 90s, long before I was in the legislature, we had our biggest crisis. Our teachers' retirement system was funded at about 9%, which I know it's unbelievable, but that has changed dramatically. And the teacher retirement system is now 53%, which is the lowest of all 9 funds, and our average is somewhere in the range of 70 to 72% for all of the funds. Next slide, please. One of the first things we did during my tenure was address our investment flexibility within our Investment Management Board, which is a non-political entity created in 1997 that attempted to unify the way investments were performed. Now, we had an issue in the late 80s in our state where there was an investment scandal in the state treasurer's office, which led to severely restricted investment flexibility throughout the 1990s, prior to the formation of the Investment Management Board, and obviously after it was formed in 1997. And so there was, we missed out on a lot of the potential gains that occurred during the 1990s with the stock market and equities. And as a consequence, because of the memory of what happened, it was difficult to finally increase our level of flexibility in this Investment Management Board, which controlled all the monies for all of these funds. And finally we did, and led us to increase our percentage in equities, alternatives, international funds, not in the sense of a prudent investment approach, but at least a legal list that allowed us to use specific percentages for each of these and allow us to make what we feel are better assumptions for the future in terms of the return. Next slide. We, in 2007, created a new system called the Emergency Medical System, which is for paramedics and other associated public safety folks dealing with medicine in general. And these were, it's a small plan in the few hundreds that really was an effort to give them additional flexibility within their system, keep their retirement age a bit lower than it was in the public employee retirement system, which is the norm for these public safety individuals. But the age and service requirements are also made a bit higher in the upper end of the age range for this particular group. They were also, their contribution levels were higher in the range of 8.5%, but with a trigger if the unfunded liability got to a certain level, or the fundedness went down to a certain level, then there was a trigger for their contribution rate to go up in an effort to try to self-regulate to keep the fund in a stable position. And that hasn't been necessary as yet, but it is a fund that we have found to be quite useful, and its fundedness is actually over 100% now. Next slide, please. Now, this is probably one of the more controversial things that we did, which is actually the reopening of the Washington Teachers Retirement System. Now, in the early 90s, because of the severe situation with our teacher retirement system, a new system was created, a defined contribution system. That was in, I believe, in 1992. And those folks were fine until the downturn in the 2001, 2002 era, and many of these people lost a lot of money. Of course, they were fine as long as the market was doing well, but when it went south, then they started getting quite concerned, and ultimately we worked out a process where they could rejoin, or initially there was an attempt to merge the old system, which was for the teachers hired prior to 1992, with the new system for where all the new teachers went in 1992. And there was actually legislation that was enacted to create a system whereby there be a vote of the members of the defined contribution plan who to see whether they wanted to go in, and that actually passed, both in terms of the numbers who voted and in terms of the percentage voting. And and so we were in the process of trying to move all those folks because of the difference in contribution rates between the two systems. I know it's somewhat counterintuitive. The state, if this had happened, if there had been an all or nothing move of all these individuals into the old retirement system, the state would have saved a few $100 million. But there was litigation by those who did not want to move out of the defined contribution, who lost the vote, and ultimately that was upheld in court because they felt it was a taking. And so that was all thrown out, and we ended up with a situation where we still had these folks without enough to retire on, and ultimately a couple of years later we were able to pass another piece of legislation that allowed folks to actually choose. And the difficult part of that is we needed to have a certain percentage in certain cohorts because it depended on whether they were young or old, how much it would help the state or hurt the state with this transfer. And so ultimately we found a way to do that, and 80% of the individuals in the defined contribution plan went back into the retirement system, and they took all their money with it. They had to pay the difference in the contribution rates with interest, and because of the nature of those who went in, the state actually over time will save in excess of $30 million because of this transfer from defined contribution back into the defined benefit plan. Now, next slide, please. Now, the judges system was another one of our systems that we addressed earlier in my tenure, and this is a small system, of course. And for the new hires into the system, we increased the contribution levels to over 10% and decreased their benefits to the extent that the existing judges, at the retirement, they got 75% of what the sitting judges were getting, not what they got, but what the sitting judges, even if that, and so their pension would go up as the salaries of the judges went up who had succeeded them. We changed that to only giving the judges 75% of what their final average salary the last 3 highest years, in essence saving money for the system. Next. Now, the other great problem that I had to deal with, in addition to the teachers' merger or teacher reopening, which was a huge undertaking, was our municipal police and fire pension systems. We do not have a state system for this, or we didn't until this legislation passed. There were 53 individual plans, and the total combined unfunded liability of these was approximately $750 million when this all started. And after a couple of years of work trying to bring the various stakeholders together, we ultimately, in a special session, passed legislation because of the imminent default of one of our larger cities, and created a new process allowing the cities to go into, at least put new hires into a new system that would be one of our state systems, which had somewhat lower benefits and was lower cost for the city. But the only way we will allow a municipal plan to go into this new system, which was less expensive, was if they changed their contribution from what we call an alternative plan, which was a simpler and more cost-effective for the city, but did not keep up with their obligations, back to an actually defined contribution rate. And as time has gone on, several cities have begun to do this, and we now have close to 100 employees in this new created state pension system, which was our 9th. We also created a board to oversight the 53 existing systems, which are still in place, which are locally controlled, but there is much more oversight than before, with the power to litigate against if there's something untoward done regarding governance, investments, or disability determinations. And we also generally created a few reform efforts within those existing plans and the way they are controlled. I will add that this is one of the failures, that I was never able to create a way to get additional monies from the state to these local plans. We have a revenue stream now, but it's clearly not enough because of these huge unfunded liabilities, and we're simply throwing sand by at least keeping them afloat for a bit longer. But we ultimately need to provide this revenue stream, because the state is accountable for in several ways for some of these unfunded liabilities and things that we have done and enacted. But they haven't been willing to admit that yet, and hopefully after my tenure is over, we'll find a way to give them more money. Next slide. The other, of course, other post-employment benefits, health retirement benefits, is a huge thing that most of us have ignored until recently, when it became necessary for us to at least account for it. And there was a lot of sticker shock when that occurred. probably about 2007 or 2008, and we calculated ours to be about $8 billion because of all these promises we made in the 70s, 80s, and 90s. We have, with some effort, been able to get that system under control, or at least that unfunded liability under control, by doing two things. One, we created a cap on the increase in the health benefits subsidy, which comes from our retirement or our public employee insurance agency, which obviously provides insurance for actives and retires. But for the retireds, the subsidy was capped at 3% per year, with the belief that ultimately they will have to pay more, and certainly changed our liability going forward by doing that. But also, we're able to create a revenue stream to provide the amortization for this going forward from another old workers' compensation fund, which will no longer be needed for that, and we'll change it in 2016 over to this other post-employment benefit stream. And this is calculated to be eliminated with this amortization also by 2035. And we were very delighted that we've at least addressed this. This was not easy dealing with the teachers and other employees getting these retirement benefits. And then finally, my last slide, I had hoped to be able to initiate a pension reform of the teachers' retirement system and public employment system before I departed, and was unsuccessful last year. I think it's going to be more likely this year that something like this will occur because of the election being over. We've had, with the death of Senator Byrd 2.5 years ago, we've had a series of elections. Dominoes have ensued, and we have not been able to get some of the things done that we would have liked. But my belief is, although we have a path forward to get all these unfunded liabilities paid for, our retirement system is still a bit richer than it should be for these two elements, and we trying to deal with the public employment system by doing three different changes. One, to reduce the final average salary calculation from to 5 years from 3 years, and to increase the contribution rate, which is one of the lowest in the country for this, at 4.5% to 6%. But also to deal with sick leave and the service credit from that, but most contentiously to affect the retirement age or age and service requirements for new hires. All of these would be for new hires. None of the actives would be affected, and that's why the politics of it are a little simpler. But we're hoping to raise the normal retirement age, in essence, to 62 for all of these systems. Anything below that, except for the public safety people, of course, anything below that would be actuarially less, depending on the retirement and service. But my hope is that that this will be able to be addressed by the new legislature, because it's important for us to get our house completely in order. Although we've come a long way, this is important to me. Again, I look forward to your questions, and I appreciate the opportunity to be a part of this webinar.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Senator Foster. Our final speaker is Louisiana Senator Elbert Guillory. Senator Guillory.
Good afternoon, and welcome from the beautiful, sunny state of Louisiana. I am the neophyte at the table. I've been chairman of retirement only 1 year, but I have my lawyer, Laura Gail Sullivan, sitting right here with me, and she'll assist me and correct me as appropriate. We have responsibility for 4 state systems and 9 statewide systems. Our efforts are designed to protect our workers, the workers of Louisiana, and to protect the taxpayers. And our goals have been the soundness of the systems, fairness of the benefits, and attention to the retirees. We start with the Constitution. The Constitution is a contract between the people and their government. people of Louisiana have mandated that the legislature provide for public retirement systems that are funded annually on an actuarially sound basis. The constitutional, at 1029, the Constitution sets the legislature shall provide for retirement, the legislature shall enact laws providing, the legislature shall set all required contributions, the legislature shall provide an amount necessary to fund, legislature shall provide for amortization of the unfunded accrued liability. So we start with clear responsibility and weighty responsibility of the legislature. We started acknowledging the problem in 1987. We passed a constitutional amendment that required actuarially sound funding. Payments of the UAL from 1988 would be wiped out by 2029. In 2005, we passed a law reducing benefits for new hires, taking some of the responsibility early, prior to the time that most states got involved in this. We increased contributions of employees and indicated that there would be no full retirement before age 60. In 2006, we passed a new constitutional amendment that required that new benefit increases must identify the source of funding and be paid for in 10 years. So we've been looking at the problems for a while. And of course, as usual, commitment to the implementation has been a greater problem than finding fiscally sound ideas or making those laws. In 2009, we passed another law, Act 497, which consolidated some of our debts and credits and provided a more prudent payment plan for the UAL. This is ultimately expected to save Louisiana taxpayers $500 million. And in 2010, we flattened and streamlined the benefit structure with a set of benefits for hazardous duty employees and a different set for non-hazardous duty employees. For all new members of our 4 state systems, this reduced benefit envy, as well as piggybacking, which previously caused all benefits to be enhanced once one group succeeded in gaining a benefit increase. A lot of competition there between the workers in their various systems. Looking at our present conditions, our state retirement costs have quadrupled over the last 2 decades. Our UAL has tripled over the past 2 decades to $19 billion. The UAL for the 4 state retirement systems that we are responsible for is almost triple the payroll of the employees covered by those systems. We can't grow our way out of this. And Louisiana taxpayers today are spending nearly $2 billion just on state retirement. Obviously, when that much money is going on to retirement, roads, schools, health, other education all suffer. One of our biggest concerns has been the fragility of our systems. In 2008, as happened all over the nation, our systems took a real beating. Our systems are so fragile that we're concerned that they would not be able to withstand another 2008, certainly not 2 2008s during the next decade. So one of our biggest concerns has been to shore up the strength of those systems. last year, in 2012, the governor designed a retirement pension package and sent it to the legislature, and it had several requirements. One of them was the final average compensation, moving it from 36 months to 60 months. That did not pass. We also were going to increase employee contribution rates by 2 percentage points. That bill did not pass. We considered a COLA bill that would not grant COLAs until all of the systems were 80% funded. That one did not pass. And age 67, there was an age 67 bill that would have required that all Louisiana workers retire at age 67 and not before. That bill did not pass. We did pass the House Retirement Chairman's cash balance plan for new hires, kind of a hybrid between a defined benefit and a defined contribution plan. Employees would contribute 8% of their pay to their accounts, and employers would provide a 4% match. There would be a floor during bad years beneath which the contributions, the gains would not be lost. And in good years, of course, the gains would accrue normally. This cash balance plan did pass. It's being challenged right now. You'll see how that is going to play out. The new cash balance plan does have some cost to the state. It would provide a predictable contribution rate, which is sorely lacking with a traditional defined benefit plan. It's not there. That predictability of contribution rate is absent there. This new cash balance plan, which applies only, as I said, to new hires, we think will ultimately be ruled to meet the Social Security equivalency. Because the UAL payments are on an increasing schedule, the payments the state must make will continue to grow, even if active employee benefits are drastically reduced. Now let's move. That was last year. One out of 5 passed. This year, we contemplate one major retirement bill, and it will be a bill that grants COLAs. COLAs will be granted once every 2 years, and there'll be a permanent benefit to workers. Some of our retirees have not had a COLA in 5 years. The purchasing power of many of them, my mother's a perfect example. She's 103 years old. She retired more than 40 years ago. Her purchasing power is very greatly diminished. We just haven't kept up with our responsibilities to retirees. So we're going to this year pass or certainly attempt to pass a COLA bill that will guarantee COLAs. Employees or retirees rather will have to have retired at least 5 years. They must be at least 65 years old. Those benefits will be eligible for permanent benefit increases for survivors or beneficiaries. And I think that's pretty much it. That's what we expect to do this coming year. this bill does include a couple of other points that will shore up systems. It will require that the final average computation switch from 36 months to 60 months, and it'll be phased in over a period of about 4 or 5 years. Yes, employees will be asked to pay another 2%, 3%, and in return for that, of course, they will get a additional defined benefit. That is where Louisiana is, and I'll be happy to answer any questions that you have.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Senator Guillory. We do have several questions, and looks like each of you all have a question, so I'm going to start with Oklahoma first. The question was, Oklahoma's reforms, did they impact current employees or future employees, Mr. McDaniel?
Thank you for the question. Clearly the COLA reform affected all retirees, and again, it's a little bit different. It just said we're going to require full funding at the time of enactment. Pretty much everything else dealt with new future hirees. The part-time pay would be one small issue that dealt with current folks that were getting ready to retire that were looking at going part-time, but that just affected the school districts by making them contribute at the same percentage rate, even though it's a lower dollar amount because they're part-time employees. And so since we didn't prevent folks from being able to take retirement and then tap the retirement system and then work part-time, you could almost say across the board, most issues all dealt with future employees only.
Great. Excellent. Thank you, Mr. McDaniel. We have a question for Senator Foster. Senator, in recent years, the investment mix of state retirement portfolios has changed drastically, with more and more states relying on non-governmental securities to generate additional revenues. I know you mentioned in your presentation West Virginia's changes on this front. The question was, how does West Virginia handle this in terms of the asset mix? How did the extra exposure to non-governmental securities impact the state's retirement plans during the recent downturn, particularly in relation to other states?
I'm not sure I have a comparison. I do know that we fared reasonably well during the downturn. We do not have a lot of exposure in alternative investments yet, although we have the jurisdiction to do that. We are still gradually getting more into equities. We were very low into equities before, and we have gradually moved up with that. Unfortunately, I don't think we were as highly invested as we might have been when the downturn occurred in 2008 and 2009. But to be honest, we probably fared better than other states who were more heavily exposed, whether it was in international investments, whether it was with alternatives, or just with equities. We still had a high percentage of fixed income investments at that time, and we have not gone overboard yet in those more risky or speculative investments. And so the fact that we were delayed doing that because of our prior experience perhaps may have helped us through that downturn. So my intuitive guess is that we probably fared better than other states. One thing that we did do that I didn't mention in my presentation, in addition to the investments, is that we have had, believe it or not, over the last several years, even through the downturn, surpluses, and particularly during 2005 through 2008, rather than lowering taxes, we took our additional monies and put it into paying down the unfunded liability, which helped us greatly as well. But I hope I answered your question.
Thank you, Senator Foster. Senator Guillory, we have a question for you. The question is, basically the investment assumptions of state retirement plans have come under increasing scrutiny in recent years. How does Louisiana handle this in terms of the investment assumptions?
First, let me tell you that I'm turning green with envy listening to West Virginia's surpluses. But in addition to that, we have started to change our assumptions. We are lowering ours to 7.5 in increments, starting at about 8 or 2.5. So we think that that's a more responsible and that's more consistent with reality.
Okay. Thank you. This question is actually for all the presenters, and I don't know which order you all want to go in. But anyway, it is, have there been any cases where retirees have formally organized to be represented in any negotiations regarding their pensions during these reform initiatives?
I'd love to start. This is Representative McDaniel. Everyone could feel that we were going to do major reform coming into the 2011 session, and it was interesting how they formed a coalition of every group coming together. They thought it was going to be more extreme than we came out with, and we tried to work with every group. I will say that by the end we were working together, but it was interesting how they were all one team until the legislation came out, and then they all went to fight their own battles depending on what the group wanted to do. And so we kept it pretty peaceful. Obviously there were some times of stress, and there were small pockets that just didn't want to make any changes.
I can respond to that as well. This is Dan Foster.
Great.
In my two major initiatives, the reopening or quasi-merger of our two teachers' plans, obviously I had to work closely with the very organized the branch of the AFT as well as our WVEA, which is associated with the NEA. We have two competing in this day, which makes it a little more complicated because they are issues between them as well as between them and us. And I was able to work well with them. They were very much involved through that and very helpful, I would say, when it came to time to influence their employees to switch. We obviously want as high a percentage in this reopening as possible that would be best for the state, and they were very helpful in educating their members about the fact that they needed to move over from one to the other if they wanted to probably get the best deal. And the reason we got to an 80% situation, which we didn't expect. The other major involvement I had was with the municipal fire and police, and I had to work with those folks, the firemen, the policemen, for a couple of years, because there were some significant compromises in the new state plan from what they have in their existing plans in terms of COLAs, in terms of disability, in terms of final average salary, but they realized that if we didn't do something that they were in jeopardy down the road, and they worked well, but they were very organized, and it was a good experience for me to go through those at times very difficult negotiations, and again they took almost 2 years to finally come to fruition.
In Louisiana too, our retiree associations are always vigilant. They're very strong. They are very careful to protect their benefits. Our COLAs are only ad hoc, so they aren't worried that they'll lose a promised benefit. But they're working with us right now. As a matter of fact, just when I came to this webinar, we left a retirement committee meeting dealing with the issues of COLAs, and they're there, they're at the table, and very much a part of the changes that we are making.
One final question. This is for Mr. McDaniel. It's sort of a follow-up to the response from earlier. So most of the UL reduction came from the repeal of previously declared future COLAs. Is that correct, Mr. McDaniel?
Yes, and it's a little bit confusing in that by requiring the pre-funding of the COLA, that in effect actually means it's probably a lot less likely. We haven't given a COLA in many years, and we also, just interesting to note, our second idea on the COLA was the 80% funding status for all systems, kind of like Louisiana. And I did occasionally use the language of it's a permanent benefit increase, which was passed in Louisiana. But in effect, yes, over $5 billion since we dealt with age increases for future hires only. We won't really receive any of the savings benefits shown by the actuaries for a few years. And so we had a few other things that popped it up to $5.5 billion, but you could probably say $5.3 billion of the immediate fall was our actuaries had assumed that we would give a 2% COLA unfunded that would be absorbed by the pension systems every other year for the next 30 years. And by saying that either you don't get one or that you have to pay for it up front meant that that would no longer be an unfunded liability to the pension system, and therefore they could take away that assumption, and that's where we got most of our savings.
Great. Well, I think we've come to the end of our hour here, and I want to thank all our speakers today for their contributions, and to all of you for spending an hour of your afternoon here with us. I hope you found it useful and informative. If you have further questions after we close, please feel free to forward them to my attention, and we will do our best to answer them. The webinar, including the slides, will be available in a day or so on the CSG Knowledge Center and on the SLC website. Finally, a big thanks to Heather for all her help in pulling this webinar together. If there's anything more that CSG or SLC can do for you in your work as a legislator or legislative staffer, please don't hesitate to contact me. Have a great afternoon.